we've talked about the first game. So you got South Carolina starting 0-1. I know you're doing your crystal ball predictions for the Gamecocks. Just give your overall outlook. Again, I've got South Carolina at 3-7. Marler felt like I was being a little harsh, but I can admit to everyone again, I'm going a little conservative. I mean, I'd maybe pick 4-6 if I wasn't being conservative, to be honest with you. But I've got 3-7 right now with wins over Vanderbilt, Missouri, and Ole Miss. And I'll even tell you, I'll be honest, I think the Ole Miss and Missouri games in the back end of the schedule scare me. You know, I sent a video to a buddy of mine. I was, hey, look at this. Barrett Salesia said Ole Miss is the most underrated team in the SEC. Doesn't bode well for us. So it's just like the last thing I want to hear right now. But you got the Gamecocks starting 0-1. Just give your overall outlook. If you had to give a record projection right now for South Carolina, what would it be?
It's between 3-7 and 4-6. And there are a couple of things that I'm still trying to play out in my mind just because, you know, I've as of right now, I have those same exact wins that you have. I feel like we've agreed a lot on this. But the Ole Miss thing, I'd feel a lot better if I knew that John Rice Plumlee was going to be the guy. But it kind of seems like Matt Corral is going to be starting at Ole Miss, and that frustrates me as a big John Rice Plumlee supporter. I think the kid is absolutely electric, and I just want to see what he can do in a Lane Kiffin offense. But as of right now, that's kind of where we're looking because they would have to go out and get a game like either Texas A&M or Kentucky would be the two ones that I think that can happen. But if we're talking about those games, because those are both late in the year, correct?
Yeah, Kentucky's the last game. A&M is week 7, I believe.
Yeah. So if they come off the bye and they face a team like A&M, or maybe if A&M's already out of contention, here's the thing that like people aren't necessarily talking about. If we get to this week 6 point and there's all of a sudden opt-outs at programs that are out of it.
That's a good point.
In a year in which eligibility doesn't count. I mean, eligibility is just like, hey, it kind of is what it is at this point. If we do see guys that are just like, you know what, I'm gonna take a back seat, and I don't think that's going to be SEC wide where that's going to start happening everywhere. But could a team like A&M, which has high preseason expectations, be impacted like that? Could that be a game where later in the year South Carolina is able to get that because they've got guys who have a foot out the door to the NFL draft or something like that? Then I think that's realistic. Or those are the potential swing games where I think there are certain games where like I don't care how many guys test positive and go in quarantine, like South Carolina is probably not going to beat LSU. Like I wouldn't necessarily bank on that happening. But I think an A&M or Kentucky where you kind of wonder where they're at from a depth standpoint, if they could be hurt and if South Carolina can catch them on the on the right week, that's the type of swing game that's going to be so crucial. So yeah, I mean I agree with you with 3-7. Prediction for the year, but obviously that's really subject to change, and expectations are so fluid this year in this very, very strange college football season we're about to embark on.
Yeah, I think the swing games, and I talked about this before, I certainly think, and maybe I guess many teams could say this, but the swing games are going to really decide South Carolina's fate. There's a lot of games in there that, it's funny. We, kind of moving on to a different subject, but you talked about Kentucky. It's so funny. I think most South Carolina fans still believe that you should never lose to Kentucky in football. I mean, I'm one that low-key thinks that, but people have to understand what Mark Stoops has built. Me and Marler talked about this on the last show, that you have to respect what Mark Stoops has built, man. They have a culture there. They get their guys in there. You get Terry Wilson back. That's going to be a good football team. So I definitely think the swing games, like a Kentucky, are going to determine, if South Carolina gets to that 5-5 point, they're able to win a few of those swing games.
I wouldn't want to get Kentucky early in the season. I have Kentucky beating Auburn in that season opener. And, people are going to be surprised by this.
I know you were as shocked as I was when that opening line came out and it was Kentucky plus 11.
That's an insult. That is an absolute insult. I would have jumped all over that. I'm a big Kentucky believer, and I have been for a bit. Getting to, we've been able to interview Mark Stoops a couple times on the podcast and stuff like that. And, we've been able to kind of get a feel for their program. Cash Daniel's been really good to us the last couple of years here. And, I've really gotten to kind of see where Kentucky has been able to grow. And they're in a place right now where I did my top 25 SEC offensive players, and I had 3 Kentucky offensive linemen in the top 25. Like 3. And by the way, all 3 of those kids were former 4-star recruits. Like, we're not talking about like this random 2-star kid who's been propped up just because he's at Kentucky or something like that. We're talking about like U.S. Army All-Americans who are now seniors at Kentucky and who are making their way. And that's why they were able to block teams so well last year, and they had the best running game in the country. And people might not realize, like, Yeah, they lose Lynn Bowden. I get that. But they returned 3 backs who combined for nearly 2,000 rushing yards and 20 touchdowns last year. Like, that ground game was incredibly good. And, I was able to catch up with Terry Wilson this offseason. And his story, if you haven't, like, been able to see it, is a wild one. And Kentucky is going to start him in the opener regardless of Joey Gatewood's eligibility. Like, I'll go on record and say that now. But I think Terry Wilson is going to surprise a lot of people this year. And I think that if he can stay healthy, he stretches the field better than most people give him credit for. And the dynamic that he had to deal with in 2018 with a really, really good defense with Josh Allen and a power run game, where that was what they were going to do. And they didn't want him necessarily to turn the ball over, and especially when he was dealing with a midseason knee injury for 7 games. Terry Wilson was a different quarterback on the bookends of the season. The numbers reflect that as well. So I think that Kentucky has a chance, especially with that defense, which was a top 15 unit, which returns, I think 75% of their production. I can't remember the exact number, but I think Kentucky has a chance to be really, really solid, and a team that week to week in the SEC, we're like, oh, all right, Kentucky held its own again. Okay. And by season's end, who knows what we're talking about when it comes to Kentucky, but that's a game on the schedule that is by no means a gimme for South Carolina.
No, for sure. I'd call it a toss-up, certainly. Connor, I want to ask you sort of a fun question I posed to our listeners and followers and everything else. Obviously, I've talked about 5-5 being the number. If South Carolina, because, again, they're 3.5 in Vegas right now. So if they are to overachieve, if they're to exceed expectations, if they're to get to 5-5 or, God forbid, better, surprise and shock the entire SEC, if they are to get to that point, when we look back on the season, in your opinion, it will be because of what?
Because Mike Bobo worked. Because Mike Bobo was able to figure out ways to maximize the potential of this offense. An offense that has really struggled to run the ball immensely under Will Muschamp. And an offense that learned how to have an identity, what exactly that was, got a starting quarterback, and just went with it. And I don't know, as of right now, who's going to finish the season as South Carolina's starting quarterback. I love Ryan Helinski's story. I really do. But this, as you said, this is a time where you need to be able to get results. This is a results-based business, and the scoreboard dictates everything. And I think that if Colin Hill is that guy and Mike Bobo is the one engineering this offense for South Carolina, then I don't think South Carolina fans will care if they get to 5 wins. But I do think that is really the key for all of this to be able to work. And again, it's the little things as well. Like, defense, getting the 5-star guys, as we talked about, to look the part is obviously really important. But, it's figuring out what it looks like on offense early and being able to establish that identity, to establish some sort of a running presence and not use the Marshawn Lloyd injury as an excuse, as devastating as that is. But Mike Bobo is going to be the key to South Carolina's season.